I'm Lily Shanker, and I'm interviewing Mr. Jeff Katz on Wednesday, March 29th, 2017. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and agreeing to speak to me today. I know you are the mayor of Cooperstown, and that's so exciting, and I will ask you more about that later in your interview. But first, could you answer a few questions about your life before your term as mayor?
Sure.
Were you born here?
No, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, so part of New York City.
What's your most favorite memory of your life in this community?
There's so many memories. So I've always been a big baseball fan. So the first time I came to Cooperstown was July of 1973. I was almost 11, and it was the most amazing place I'd ever seen. Starting in about 1980, I would come every year just to visit. And then we moved here in 2003. So I think actually, even though it's not a specific memory, when we moved here in June of 2003, that was the most amazing thing. I never would have seen that happening. So just coming here and having an address in Cooperstown was really exciting.
Okay, so what early experiences influenced you throughout your life?
I think on a personal level, I was always a reader. I always liked to read. And originally, I read a lot of sports books and baseball books, but as I got older, I always read, and still do. So I think reading kind of was a pivotal thing for me in terms of how I thought and how I tried to become knowledgeable in things. And I think valuing education and schooling really helped me become who I am. It made me open to new things. It made me want to learn new things. And like when we moved to Cooperstown, I had no plans of running for office or being mayor. I was asked and I did it and I found it interesting and I felt I could help. But it all kind of stems back to being a kid and really loving to read.
Okay. So who was your most memorable teacher?
I've had some good ones. I would have to say that, do you want their names? Are their names important? You wouldn't know them.
No.
So there were a few social studies teachers when I went to high school, and I went to high school in Long Island. I went to a place called Sachem High School, which was huge. My senior class was about 1,500 people, just that class. It was a huge school. But I had all these social studies teachers that I used to go hang out with them, like during study hall, and we would just kind of like play history games and talk about history and movies and sports. And I always loved that. I felt like special because they liked me and I liked them. But there was a guy named Tom Neal who was a lawyer, and he taught a basic law class. And through that class, I participated in like a statewide mock trial competition where you would go to Manhattan to the courtroom before a real judge and make a case. And I did that a couple of times. It was really exciting. Then when I went to college in Binghamton, I had a professor who taught Russian. I took Russian for a semester, and I learned a lot about Russian literature, which became a real passion of mine. So those are the ones that stand out.
And what did they teach you that you still think about today, like moral lessons?
So there's a teacher, and I'm glad you asked that question because it brings to mind another teacher who I don't think of as a great teacher, but actually probably was the most important person in my life. His name was Mr. McDonald, I think. He was a chemistry teacher in high school. And I was always a good student, and I always got good grades. But I was a junior in high school, and he said to the whole class, he said, you all need to work hard and prepare and develop good study habits. Even you smart people. Because as life goes on, you need to develop those good habits. And I always got good grades, so I could have blown him off and not cared. But it stuck, and it changed my whole way of how I prepared for school, for job, for life as mayor. So that was probably the single most important thing I was ever told.
Okay. So what brought you to Cooperstown?
So like I said, I was always a baseball fan, and I was always like a baseball tourist. So I would come, and I'd park for the day, and I'd go to the hall, and I'd go to Sal's, I'd go back to the hall, I'd go to Schneider's, and I'd leave town. So I was like one of those people. But my wife Karen and I, Karen's from upstate. She grew up around Schenectady. and our parents still live in that area. So we would come every year, and we always had this idea that we would like buy a house here. Maybe we would vacation here, maybe we would move. We have 3 sons. They're pretty old now. Nate is 26, Robbie is 24, and Joey's 21. Nate is high-functioning autistic, and where we lived, so I didn't bring this up, we lived near Chicago for a long time. So the high school that Nate would have gone to was like the high school I went to in Long Island, really big, like 5,000 kids. And it just wasn't going to be a good fit. So we thought, let's buy a house in Cooperstown, and let's move here when Nate's in 9th grade. So we bought a house. We visited this school, the elementary school. We met, did you know Ms. Gorman when she was principal?
Yeah.
We met Ms. Gorman, and we met Miss Bliss Lamb, who works here, and they were so nice and said, whatever Nate needs. And Nate actually never went to this school. He only went to the high school. But once we met everybody and knew school was good, we just moved, like in a month, full time. So, so Nate is what kind of motivated us, but we all knew that we would all gain a lot by being here, and it's been a good move for us.
Okay. So describe your fondest memory of coming to this area.
So the first time I came in 1973, it was like magic to me, because I only grew up like in a city, in a suburb, so I'd never really seen like a real small village. So my first memories are really of the Hall of Fame and what it looked like back then. As I got older, and a lot of times I would come from Albany. So that drive on Route 20, like Cherry Valley, where it gets like really big and opens up to the valley, that to me was always the most pretty thing. Now that I'm here, like I have a lot of different memories, but kind of the approach to Cooperstown, seeing Cherry Valley, then seeing the lake, was always really special. It really was exciting to see that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, walking the streets of Cooperstown today, in what ways has Main Street changed since you moved here?
So for me, we've been here 14 years. Main Street hasn't changed that much in 14 years. There are more restaurants. That's different. There are less empty stores in the winter. There are a few that kind of closed down, but there used to be, even a few years ago, like empty. Like there was no storefront there. So I think that shows things have gotten better. For people who have lived here a long time, they've seen it change a lot. And even as a tourist, like all the baseball shops didn't really come till like the 90s. Like coming here in the 80s, it was still a very kind of old-fashioned town. There were like a couple of baseball stores, and there were, furniture stores and bake shops, So it was amazing that it kind of held on that long. But for my experience here, it hasn't changed that much.
So now for some mayor questions.
Okay.
You are the mayor of Cooperstown. What inspired you to be mayor?
So it's interesting, because when I went to college, I was a political science major, so I studied like politics and history. So I was always, getting back to earlier, like I always read a lot and was interested in that. In 2005, a friend of mine asked me if I would run for village trustee. There are 6 trustees and the mayor. And I'm like, sure, why not? That sounds like fun. And getting back to what I told you about my high school teacher, I worked really hard. I felt if I was running for office, then I needed to know as much as anybody. So I read old reports and talked to former mayors and trustees. Like I wanted to know. And I won. I got the most votes, and I won. As soon as I got on the board, it struck me that there was a lot of progress we could make. The way we had to fix our streets. I mean, we really were kind of in a messy situation. And part of it is we didn't have enough money, and people weren't willing to kind of think of new ideas. So I was on the board. That's a 3-year term. By the end of my first term, I was reelected. Then I was named deputy mayor. So I'm like, usually in the history of the village, the person who's deputy mayor becomes the next mayor. I mean, you have to get elected. In 2010, I ran for mayor, but someone ran against me, and they won. But I didn't quit. Like the next year, I ran again for trustee, and I got reelected. And the following year, I ran for mayor, and the guy who had beaten me didn't run again. So I won. What motivated me to run for trustee was just it seemed interesting. What motivated me to run for mayor was now I knew the problems, and I had some real thoughts on how to fix them. And thankfully, in the 5 years I've been mayor, I mean, the village has changed a lot. We have more money coming in. We're fixing roads. We're fixing buildings. It's not the same village as it was like 8 years ago. It's in better shape. So running for mayor was a way for me to try to push us forward and be a more successful community.
Okay. So during your term as mayor, you've accomplished many things that help our community. Which of your accomplishments do you take most pride in?
There's a couple, and I tend to talk about more general stuff than specifics, like fixing the village budget, making sure we had more money coming in and spent it wisely was a big deal. And actually, not to criticize people who came before me, but running the village government more professionally and not based on like, oh, I know you, you're my friend, I'll approve something you want, but I don't know her, so I'll say no. You know, we try to be consistent and fair, and the village government has become a much more professional thing. So that's part of it. The other thing is, because of like my interest, being a baseball fan, I've written a couple of baseball books. I've been on like national news stories, newspapers, TV shows. So I love representing Cooperstown, and I think I've done a really good job in bringing a different face to Cooperstown to certain areas. So I'm happy to be like a really good ambassador for Cooperstown.
What do you have yet to accomplish?
So once I became mayor, I kind of had a checklist of things I wanted to do. And most of them have been done. Like, we've raised more money from paid parking, we're fixing streets, we're getting more grants from the government that are helping us fix Main Street and not having village taxpayers pay for it. One of the things we've needed to do for about 25 years is build a new sewer plant, which we haven't been able to, but I just got $4 million from the state to rebuild the sewer plant. The one thing I'm still working on is fixing Doubleday Field. It needs work in the stadium. It needs work in the parking lot. It could use some more green space. There's a lot of stuff. That's been a trickier one than I thought. So that's the one thing that's hanging out there that I hope I can get done.
Okay. So, what is the most challenging part of being mayor?
You know, on the whole, I enjoy it all. The challenging part was bringing in some new ideas and getting them through. I think sometimes the most challenging part is, like, I like being mayor of a small village. I like that when I walk down the street, people have questions for me, and I think that's nice. You know, I'm not the governor, I'm not the president. You should be able to see me at Stagecoach Coffee and say, I got a question for you. What probably bugs me the most is people who do a lot of criticizing, not because I'm against criticism, but when they don't actually find out what they're talking about ahead of time. I've been saying this a lot. So, you know, the budget is all our finances, right? All the money that comes in and how it's spent. And there are people out there who say, like, I don't know what's going on there. Where do they spend this money? Where's it going to? And I'm like, if you really care, click on the link and read the budget. Like, it's not a mystery. We're not like a little secret organization. So it's challenging to me sometimes to not lose my mind when people say stuff that they could easily find out the answer to before they make a big stink about it. So that's challenging.
What is the most rewarding part of being mayor?
I think for me, seeing all the work getting done. I mean, there are people who like didn't have their roads paved for decades. They had like given up that their street would ever be nice again. So when I look around and see that the roads are better, that the village hall where the library is and the government is getting fixed up and is looking beautiful, rebuilding the sewer plant, stuff like that, I just take great pride in that. You know, a lot of people say like being mayor is a thankless job, like, but it's not. I find it really rewarding.
Okay. So, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently for our community?
I'm going to give you a long answer to that.
Okay.
And I think the answer is probably nothing, that I wouldn't do anything different. But after I was in office for a while, I don't know if you've ever met or know Hugh McDougall, who's our village historian. Hugh's a very cool dude. And he gave me a book that he found at the used book sale, the library sale. And I forget what it's called. It was like Small Towns in Modern Society. And it was from like 1960. But when I read the book, I realized all of the things I had kind of violated. Like, by the way I approached my ideas and the way I presented them, I know I stepped on a lot of toes and maybe hurt some feelings and maybe could have been like smoother about that. But when I look back, I don't know if there was another way to kind of break through. So on one hand, like, yeah, I wish I could have been actually probably a smoother politician, but I don't think I could have been and been as successful at it.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
What is it like being in politics at a time in which people seem to have many different political opinions?
To some degree, that doesn't hit Cooperstown. What's interesting, there's a thing in Cooperstown where people say, well, you know, being a Republican or Democrat doesn't mean anything in a small village. That's like half true, because for the people it does matter to, it matters totally to. Like, people who are like hardcore Republicans will only vote for Republicans, and people who are hardcore Democrats will only vote for Democrats, even in village elections. Some of the stuff that is nationally destructive doesn't hit Cooperstown directly. But as I deal a lot with the state government, that can be trickier, where, you know, state government can be more like federal, where there are people like really angry on both sides. And I try to just represent Cooperstown well, but I think we're fortunate that we don't debate that stuff here. We don't have to tackle that stuff. It really, in classic small village government, it's really fixing the roads, fixing the sidewalks, you know, making sure things are running smooth. And it's much easier to deal with. I mean, I have my own personal opinions on social issues and stuff, but they're not totally relevant. Let me just add, I know I told you I talk fast, and I talk a lot. The village government has, in the last few years, done stuff that is more national. Like, we were against fracking, the drilling in the area, because we felt that would hurt our businesses, Bassett Hospital, the tourism. We had a resolution against climate, you know, against pro-climate, you know what I'm saying, like taking a stand against fossil fuels, which was kind of a blanket statement on how we felt, and it actually, a lot of communities in the state adopted our language. We also, we had a small investment in some fossil fuel companies that we got out of. It's called divestment. You divest. And we were the first community in the country to do that. We had like a big article in the New York Times about us, which was very positive. It's like the village has a position on this. So every once in a while, we dip our toes in some big national stuff, and it can cause a little controversy locally. But we feel that when we want to make a stand on something, we do it.
Yeah, we're really lucky that all this that's coming in from like the whole country, it's not coming into here. It's like an open place where you can just...
Yeah, and I think people feel that way. Like the signs you've seen in the village of like Cooperstown's a welcoming place. Like that's another thing the village board did in, I think it was December. We just made like a resolution saying Cooperstown is a welcoming community where it doesn't matter what country you're from, what your religion is, what your sexual persuasion is, whatever. This is a good community. We welcome you all, and we won't tolerate bullying and being mean to people. I think that's reasonable for a village government to say, be nice to each other. That shouldn't be a political thing. Like, you know, what's the other side? No, I want to be mean to people. That's my position. It's like, fine, you can have that, but not us.
Yes. So, I heard that you write books about your love of baseball. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So, I forget when it was. Maybe about 2005 or 2006. My wife was editor of the Freeman's Journal, so she was working round the clock. I was home taking care of the kids, and I always, again, as a reader, I'm like, I want to write a book. I mean, I think everyone thinks that at some point. And I've read a lot of baseball books, and I was like, I can write an okay baseball book. So I'm like, I went to the Hall of Fame library, did research, and wrote a book about this little kind of baseball business story from the 1950s. And I got published. And, I did some radio interviews and stuff. And then my next goal was to, get into bigger publishing, have an agent and go to a publishing house. And I ended up doing that. I wrote a book called Split Season, which was about the 1981 baseball season and strike. The players went out on strike and didn't play for 2 months in the middle of the year. And it was really, as an older person, that was a major cultural moment. No one had ever written a book about it. So I wrote the book. It got great reviews, great press. And I was on ESPN and NPR and Major League Baseball Network. I was written up in the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. It was so much fun. And part of it also, besides talking about the book and things, I could also talk about Cooperstown. That's what I mean about being an ambassador. So here I was, in the New York Times sports section, talking about the Glimmer Glass Opera and talking about things. So it really worked nicely.
So you cut the ribbon at the Treps ceremony this year. Were your kids in Treps as children?
No, there's only one of my kids who would have been of that age when Treps started. The other two are older. He just wasn't interested in it. But I find Treps really interesting every year because, lots of people have lots of ideas. Here's a little life lesson. There's a million people with ideas, but not everyone works. So the kids who have ideas and actually work to make them and sell them, they're going to be the successful types, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone can sit back in their living room and say, I have an idea. Why don't you do it? Yeah. No one wants to hear that. To say I have an idea and I'm going to make it and I'm going to show you why it's important is great. So I look forward to going to Treps every year.
Yeah, I was in Treps this year, and I just think it's a really great organization, and it's just a really educational thing where kids can learn how to have their own business, and I think it's just really cool.
It really is cool. And some of those things, even if you didn't become a business person, the idea of working hard, of pushing your ideas, of interacting with people, about kind of making your case, saying oh, this is something you should buy and why, that's going to help you regardless of what you do in life, because now you've kind of developed the skills to interact with people. So I think it has a lot of really important parts to it.
So as we are coming to the end of our time together, I have just 2 more questions.
Okay.
What words of wisdom or advice would you give to young people today?
So I'll tell you one thing I always tell my own kids. As you get older, and maybe as a kid, maybe you feel it even more so than as an adult, there's not a lot in your control, right? People tell you what to do, your teachers, your parents. As you get older, there's really one thing you can control always, and that's your own effort and how much time you put into things. No one can tell you how much or how little to put in. And what I've found is the people who put in the most effort, who stick to it, who persevere, succeed. The people who don't really approach things seriously and don't work hard, it's not that they won't succeed, but the other ones do. You can always see that. So put in a lot of effort for the things you care about, and even harder, put in effort on the things you don't care about. Yeah. Because as you get older, you realize there's a lot of things you're going to have to do that you don't want to, but you still have to do them, and you have to do them well. So that's my first bit of wisdom. I have more, but we don't have time.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like us to know about your life growing up in this community?
Well, having come here, I was 40 years old when I moved here. Cooperstown gave us as a family a lot. It gave us a chance to kind of reinvent ourselves a little bit. I used to be in the financial business and always lived in cities or suburbs, and kind of changing our life at that age. It's not young, it's not old, but it's not young. Really showed me a lot that, you don't need to stick to some plan forever.
Yeah.
And to some degree, I never would have known that without Cooperstown. So that's kind of the gift Cooperstown gave me, and that's always going to be what makes the fact that we moved here and lived here, and my kids growing up here makes this place so special.
So, thank you for letting me interview
You're welcome.
you.
Thank you. Good questions.
I really appreciate you telling me your stories. They're going to be,
Good.
they could go down in history.
Well, I'll always be a mayor of Cooperstown. There's been mayors of Cooperstown for 200-something years, and I'm one of them. There's nothing, no one can take that away from me. Like, I've been the mayor of Cooperstown. So thank you. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you. So, thank you for
You're
letting me
welcome.
interview.